again, and I didn't use the word smash. So this week we've got Kyle Rojas with us. He works with Edge and Node, and that's the company behind the graph. And he's here with us to talk about their indexing protocol for querying networks like Ethereum and IPFS. And we're going to dive into how anyone can build and publish open APIs, which are called subgraphs, which make data easily accessible for dApp developers. How are you today, Kyle? You've had a busy couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, it's been crazy. ETH Denver was fun, really busy days and nights, but it's always good as long as you keep up your energy and stay alive. And then, yeah, trying to catch up. Life is good. It's always busy in this ecosystem, which is exactly what I want.
Yeah, man, I can feel that. There's always something to do, right? There's always something happening and always something to do. How was ETH Denver, by the way? Were you guys there with presence or just there as like sort of having a look around? What was the deal?
I think the graph ecosystem had around 30 people there in total, which was amazing, from the foundation to Edgenode to Semiotic to other core dev teams. And what was great is what they said was 20 to 25,000 people altogether, but there were a lot of really good builders as well. It didn't feel super commercial or overly commercial. And I had back-to-back meetings every day from morning till midnight. And they were all with just amazing builders, with chains, with new projects, with existing projects. And everyone was passionate that I was meeting with. No one seemed cheesy. No one seemed like they were just trying to grab during a bull market. It did feel like a builder's market, which was really awesome. I think it was a good vibe throughout the whole conference.
That's such an awesome thing to hear as well, because it's something we've been saying for a while now. This is a builder's market. We're kind of washing away some of the crud, it feels like, and as you say, some of the sort of crappy projects that are only out for one thing, shall we say? And
not a bunch of centralized players that we're going to burn down anyways. A lot of decentralized folks that are building the right technology.
I actually saw a really funny tweet about ETH Denver the other day. There was a guy who put up a picture of ETH Denver, and like there's a person in like a unicorn outfit and all this other stuff. And like the quote was, "People think ETH Denver is weird because Ethereum has a community." And it was a really strong statement. I was like, you're so right. Like, look at these people are so on board with it. Like, that's a real community event, right? Like ETH Denver. It's something different, I think. So it just made me laugh.
Yeah. I don't know. I like the weirdness. I feel more comfortable around weird builders than I did on Wall Street with a suit and tie and people that had it all together. Just because people feel more genuine, more honest, and their intentions are a lot more honest with themselves than others. So it's more values oriented. So yeah, I love the weird. I'll embrace it all the time.
Definitely, man. And when you're talking to builders, like you say, it's more sincere. It's not like a marketing spiel, is it? It's literally, they're talking to you about their baby. So they're not hyping it. They're literally talking about the technology, which is most interesting. You mentioned something there, and I want to jump into that. So it's really cool to meet you, Carl. I want to give people an idea of where you've come from and kind of your background in the world as well. Because when I looked at your Twitter, I was like, all right, the man used to be like in a fighter pilot, and now he's working in blockchain technology. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Carl. How did you end up in Web3? And what was your kind of path?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely have a non-traditional route, though I'm not sure if there is any traditional route in Web3 yet.
Sure.
So I enlisted in the Air Force right after high school at the ripe age of 17.
Wow.
I served around the world for 12 years. Doing everything from working on fighter jets, flying on large and small aircraft, some helicopters, and spent a lot of time in the Middle East and Africa. And I was a Middle Eastern linguist and an intelligence professional doing a bunch of fun stuff.
Wow.
Then I chose family over a really successful military career. And to make the transition to the civilian world, because my whole life as an adult, I'd been military. I didn't know how to be an adult civilian. I got my MBA at Rice University here in Houston, and then worked almost 7 years at Goldman Sachs. But along the way, I realized it wasn't the life I wanted to lead. It wasn't fulfilling for me towards the end to only have a mission focused on my bottom line.
Yeah.
And then while at Goldman, I'd been participating in the crypto space since around late 2016. And along the way, I just became a true believer in not only the fact that Web3 technology is a big part of the future, but it's just the better way to build in the world and for the world for a lot of reasons. So I finally got the guts to quit Wall Street and dove headfirst in my career. Now I'm over a year and a half into my Web3 life at Edge and Node, where I oversee global BD and partnerships. So I do a little bit of everything, which is really exciting for me because I get to stretch a lot of muscles that I never thought I would. A lot of rabbit holes to go down there, but that's kind of the gist of it. Yeah.
Definitely. Super interesting, Carl. Super interesting. Just as a kind of side note, what's the kind of, I mean, maybe your best position to answer this, you worked on Wall Street. What's the vibe around crypto on Wall Street? Like when you talked about it or mentioned it or spoke about it, what was the kind of, what do people think?
I'd say severely doubtful,
Really?
because when there's a big ship and
Yeah.
small ice cubes hit the ship and they bounce off, it doesn't matter
Mm-hmm.
until you hit an iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
And just like the Titanic, right? They didn't think there would be anything that can take down the ship. So, especially when I was in, it was severely doubtful
Right.
because they've never looked at the tech.
Yeah.
They only see the economic side of it. And even then, they don't look at the actual economics that make up some of these ecosystems. They only look at what people are doing and how some people just ape in and don't have really solid philosophies on why they're doing something, the utility of something. But I would say a bullish sign is when I was there, I knew the digital asset team at Goldman and other organizations. And when I left, the digital asset team at Goldman was only 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
A few of them have gone to the industry and founded things or joined different organizations. But that team of 5 in just a couple years that I've left has grown to, I think, 70,
Wow.
which is a bullish sign. And they're putting person power to it, they're putting capital towards it, and that means they're putting the investment in, which means that they think it's could be a part, if not is a part of the future of what their world is, the traditional finance world.
Yeah. That's
It might
interesting.
look different than what we're working on, meaning they could be working on private blockchains. They could be doing traditional, because Matt McDermott, the guy who took over at Goldman, was an old school finance guy. So they might be trying to create old school finance on blockchain rails. And I don't
Right.
know if they're building out in the open in public. So that remains to be seen, though I hope we can talk them into it. But at least they realize the power of this technology. And I think we're seeing that across the board in traditional finance in general, JP Morgan especially, and others. We're seeing that in luxury brand names, Disney, Coca-Cola, Reddit. Everyone's realizing and taking a red pill, and we all have our own red pill. And once there's some skin in the game, we realize how much fun it is, how fast it can build a community, how fun it is to be part of the community. And then we start looking under the hood and seeing what the machine's made of. And then that's when you kind of fall in love with it. So I
Yeah.
love it. I love the red pill moments for all these. And I think they'll look back and say, oh, it was this NFT push. And
Yeah.
now we are, a Web3 company, which I'd love to see for a lot of places.
Yeah, that could happen quite easily, right? For companies like Disney and other brands that are going in that direction, it could be a really interesting future for them. Thank you, man. That's like super interesting to hear, and it's a question I wanted to put to you because obviously you worked there, and it's interesting for me to find out from the ground level kind of how people think about that as well. And I guess as well, it's interesting now because there are people such as yourself with skin in the game on both sides of the fence, able to understand both outlooks and approaches, and maybe that was something that was needed for big players to come in, to have some expertise in the field and people that have got a bit of track history on both sides, because it's probably quite scary for them, right? So yeah.
It was scary for me at first. So if it was scary for me as a young person, then imagine a 160-year-old firm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anything about change, right? But they obviously see a change is needed and the competition is coming, I could say. So yeah. All right, cool. Thank you, Carl. Let's dive into Edge and Node, because I imagine a lot of people may have heard of the graph, but a lot of people may not have heard of Edge and Node, which is the company behind the graph. So can you tell us a little bit more, please, and like what your specific role is there as well? Because you're working on the graph, you don't work for the graph, right?
Yeah.
That's the correct way to put it.
Yeah. I guess it'd be, because the graph is just a protocol. It's a technology layer that doesn't have any employees, and there are people that can work on it in an open source environment. So in 2017, the graph was founded by a few folks, Yaniv, Brandon, Giannis, and they worked and built a small, really effective team. And in 2019, they launched the hosted service. In December 2020, they launched the decentralized network. And at that point, there was the token launch.
Yeah.
And at that point, the graph became a protocol. And the original graph team split into two things. One became the Graph Foundation, which is the nonprofit pushing this forward. And the other is EdgeNode, which is really working on the product, direct tech support,
Yeah.
and everything else, R&D, and so on. And since then, the Graph Foundation, even though the EdgeNode team was really the found team behind the Graph Foundation has incentivized 5 other core dev teams. So Masari, who's working on core subgraph development and data standardization across the space. Streaming Fast, who's done created brand new technology in the world, Firehose and leading to substreams, which we might talk about, and not to get too technical there, but they've created stuff that has never existed in the world that is groundbreaking for this ecosystem. So maybe we could dive in later.
Yeah, man.
There is Semiotic Labs, who's the MLRL, or what people call AI team, that's working on efficient improvements to the actual protocol, and then thinking through and doing R&D on how that would be an externally facing functionality, similar to what a ChatGPT would be.
Yeah.
And just thinking through it right now, but that team's been in this ecosystem for 2 years now, working on MLRL, which is really cool. And then there's some others that are doing operations like GraphOps and some others as well. So it's just really cool how now there's 6 amazing teams working on this, standalone teams, independent, which is how it should be. And then there's a massive, so there's probably 125, 150 people working full time. And then there's a massive multi-hundred person community that are working in the Graph Advocates DAO, that are working in Subgraph DAO, that are working in things like Graftronauts or Graph Academies. So there's so many folks working on this now, and that's all through the Graph Foundation. So EdgeNode, I'd say, is the founding team behind the Graph working on the product, whereas the Graph Foundation is stewarding core dev resources and activities, and then incentivizing core devs long-term and people within the community.
Wow.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of the way it's kind of offshooted itself there as well is super interesting as well.
Mm-hmm.
To zoom in on for the people watching as well, like the graph is quite important for builders in the Web3 space. I found out about the graph quite a while ago. I used to work at dApp Radar and obviously had a lot to do with decentralized apps. So the graph was a big deal. It was something that was spoken about a hell of a lot and became one of these kind of leading protocols in the space. In terms of tell people what it does, Carl, because it's quite a simplistic idea, but obviously it's got deeper ideas to it. But what does it do just from the outset? What can developers do with the graph?
Yeah, I mean, it's simple, but it's obviously complex because it's a dev tool.
Yeah.
But I'd say in its simplest terms, what Google does for the world's information, the graph does for data recorded on blockchains. So it's helping rebuild the internet better with open source, transparent, and then community-led infrastructure. So it's really incredible and exciting. And it was before its time, there was nothing in the world that was tackling this problem. And to dive deeper on that, the graph is decentralizing data indexing and query services for every project in the space, currently integrated with 39 blockchains and networks. And the graph ecosystem is speaking with over 70 other networks and chains, and will eventually probably, hopefully, index all chains across the entire ecosystem. But until the graph, to dive down specifically on what you asked, no projects had worked to solve the problem of reading data off blockchains. Oracles write data on blockchains, blockchains do the recording layer, but nobody had really concentrated on the read layer, let alone being able to organize it and make it accessible for users in a scalable way. Imagine a dApp trying to sift through Etherscan in real time and write a script to be able to flow that into their front end. It's just impossible after a certain way.
Yeah.
Because of that, again, until the graph, developers, like I said, have to either manually sift through transactions or run their own servers, index the data themselves, and then build and maintain their own APIs, wasting extremely scarce and what many people might know, very expensive developer resources that should be spent on building and improving a project's core product and services. So the graph solves that problem, enables developers to build open APIs called subgraphs with which projects can point to the exact information they need from any of the integrated blockchains and networks, and that data will be indexed or organized and instantly available to populate into their application or website forever. So it makes that layer a public good.
And it's also like, in terms of building sort of user-facing applications, the graph is what really came along and made it possible in my eyes as well. Because when I was working with dApps, we saw there was a handful that were really performing well. And then all of a sudden there was an explosion because it was much easier for them to call on the data that they required to build. So what I'm talking about is the kind of user-facing side of things. How does the graph see, like, what work is being done there in terms of usability for, not for developers, but when they implement the graph, how the end user can call on things? Are you like, ideally you want to abstract away a lot of the blockchain complications and things like that? How does it kind of work in that regard?
Well, I'd say right now the graph powers most of Web3 data.
Yeah.
Meaning the graph powered DeFi summer. Almost every large, at least on integrated chains, every large AMM and exchange is powered by the graph. So Uniswap, Balancer, Sushi, Trader Joe, Spooky Swap, and so on. So every big AMM and exchange, most NFT shops, most DAOs. So Snapshot fully runs on the decentralized network, and folks like the Juicebox and Lao and so on. Data analytics companies, so Masari, CoinGecko, Nomics, Token Terminal, everyone runs on the graph with Graph Tech. So it truly powers anything you do when you go to a UI, meaning you don't realize that data is flowing through the graph. And that's awesome because it's not an attention grabber. It's an essential infrastructure layer that is truly driving and powering data on every vertical in 39 blockchains right now.
Yeah.
Things wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Data wouldn't flow when I went to an app on my phone, and I go to a ton of cross-chain dApps, across many different blockchains. I don't have as much time to degen as I used to, but I love that aspect of it, just going through and tinkering. There's a lot of alpha there for me. But all that data is provided by the graph and by the graph tech, powered by it. So it doesn't matter what type of UI a dApp builds. If a dApp is gaining users, it's probably because it's using the graph to power the data in their front end.
Yeah.
And if the graph went out, the dApp would be bricked and people would leave.
Yeah.
So the graph tech is essential across the space. And that's just with the 39 blockchains. There are, again, 70 plus blockchains waiting for integration. And that's just, tip of the iceberg, because decentralized network is just taking off and getting some serious adoption, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So I'd say that it doesn't matter what the UI is, the graph will be there as a data layer, because any dApp will choose their Oracle, they'll choose their blockchain or blockchains, and they'll choose their indexing service. And they're probably not going to go build their own blockchain most of the time. They're not going to build their own Oracle. They're not going to build their own indexing service. And if they do, they almost always come back and use the graph because it's freaking hard and expensive.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about, right? Like, off-the-shelf solutions for developers to build really seamless applications rather than wasting, as you said, precious resource time. A lot of these teams are quite small, limited funds. This is necessary. And you gave the perfect answer, Carl. That's really what I wanted you to say. Like, that's how I think of the graph. If the graph falls over, the Web3 world is going to fall over fundamentally. Like, and just for the sort of layman out there that perhaps doesn't get what we're talking about calling data to apps. In a very simplistic way, what we're talking about is if you refresh say, for example, you're using a DEX and you want to swap tokens, the data for the price information has to be pulled from somewhere. That's what we're discussing here. All the information that's pulled in. So just like the internet, it pulls in a heap of info and sifts it for you and then displays it. That's what the graph is doing for dApps. So absolutely pivotal.
Yeah, I think a good analogy there is, imagine a football stadium filled with random candies of different colors and sizes, and they're just airdropped every day, millions upon millions. That's what blockchain data looks like. And imagine if you were a dApp trying to sift through and find a candy at the bottom from what year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And what the graph does is take all that through subgraphs, which we could talk about, and enable organization of it. So you know exactly when and where to go for which candies. Let's say you want to see how many holders ENS increased from May 2021 to July 2022, you go sift through that stadium and it flows into the front end. When we go to ENS or whatever it may be, in the Uniswap dashboard, analytics dashboard, that's much more information. That's a very big football stadium. And it allows us to get those candies whenever we go to the front of the store. Otherwise, we literally have to dive Scrooge McDuck style and take years to try to, it's really practically impossible for most cases. So yeah, it's really cool.
Really good analogy as well. Outlines it perfectly there as well. So let's dive into some of the more like critical nuances of what the graphics, what I see is critical components. So the Explorer, the Subgraph Studio, and hosted services. So perhaps we should break each one down a little bit and explain really what the benefits are for builders, I think, for those three things. So Explorer, Subgraph, and hosted services.
Yeah, I'll actually break that into two categories. One being the hosted service and the other being the decentralized network through which you access via the Subgraph Studio, and which is a kind of a hosted environment, but rate limited, but it's just an entryway or sandbox. So I'll break it into hosted and decentralized network.
Sure.
So as I mentioned, the hosted service was launched in 2019, has 39 chains integrated through which the majority of the ecosystem's data flows. But the hosted service has its scaling issues. It has its third-party dependency issues. And when it goes down, there's nothing anyone can do until it gets fixed, until the core devs fix it, which is often just an RPC provider going down and us at Edge of Node scrambling to get it back up and working with the teams. And that's because there's no redundancy, and which is, when the graph bricks, everything bricks. But the hosted service was always meant to be a temporary solution to unblock builders and gain adoption through subgraphs, which it has. Subgraphs have become the data standard across the ecosystem. The decentralized network, however, is what the graph was always meant to be from the beginning. Right now, there are over 460 indexers, all running independent indexing and database operations to serve queries, meaning with different RPC providers, different tech stacks in general. And they have their operations based all over the world. It is hands down the most reliable data solution with absolutely unbeatable uptime and unbreakable data, which means you'll be able to compare with consensus what the data is, because if you have a centralized provider, you simply have to trust that they have the right information and that there's no conflicting data. And that's becoming, the unbreakable data part without being able to be stopped by a third party is becoming much more existential every day for projects across every vertical in the ecosystem. But what's cool on the decentralized network, because indexers are all over the world, and the indexer selection algorithm is choosing between all those quickly and based on where the query is coming from, we're seeing better latency. We're seeing faster syncing speeds with indexers. We're seeing competitive query success rates. So the decentralized network costs much less than it costs us to run the hosted service.
Nice.
And then we're seeing fast adoption and developers just extremely excited about relying on the most resilient decentralized technology, because in the end, when I'm realizing decentralization in itself isn't the best sell is uptime.
Yes.
And the decentralized network is where everyone can participate to help, let's say the indexers, curators, and delegators making up this to scale the technology and then participate in the economics. So Edge of Node, Graph Foundation, or anyone else, there's no value extraction. It's the anti-Google, I'd say, in that we're not making money off any single transaction. It's all powered by GRT through data consumers and subgraph developers. That's paid out to indexers, curators, and delegators. And the only reason we'd be able to participate in that upside is to be able to participate as one of those roles, which is really cool to be on such a values-aligned team that this could have been a massive SaaS company.
Yeah.
A massive SaaS company. And that's why when I left, I had some really good options and I took less. I took a much lower profile roles to come join, because I realized the why of this team, and I just wanted a mission like this. So it's been great.
The SaaS thing keeps coming up time and time again in conversations right now. Like, seems to be a bit of a narrative around our space at the moment, that companies are realizing that they're sitting on a heap of proprietary tech, and that companies want to just tap into that in like a white label way, almost like with white label wallets, for example, and other things. It's becoming an opportunity out there where you've got companies that perhaps tried to specialize, but actually what they've done is build a really cool piece of tech. no one's perhaps interested in what that tech does, but it can do other things, right? So it's a interesting narrative that's emerging right now out there. How do you, if we step away from just like such specific talk about the graph for a moment, Carl, like looking at what's happening out there in the world of dApps, and as I said, I've got quite a lot of experience there. And one thing I think that's really holding them back is usability, and the fact that they are quite tricky quite tricky as a compliment, I would say. Like even the most resilient of us makes mistakes using MetaMask and stuff like this. So, in your opinion, how close are we, do you think, to like your mainstream adoption in terms of people being able to pick up a device, access a dApp, and think this is kind of easy and normal? Big question.
In short, we're still a ways away.
Yeah.
Which is great because there's more alpha for us for the next few years and to be able to have the patience to go and tinker.
Exactly.
But I'd say that even before perfecting user experience, the right tech powering everything needs to be built out for truly decentralized applications, because without a decentralized tech stack, a dApp is just an app, and an app is just more Web 2 technology. And I see decentralized technology winning in the end for a lot of different reasons, which we might discuss. But we're seeing these innovations in real time. So rebuilding all of the legacy infrastructure in Web 2, TradFi and more, but we still got a long ways to go until all these Web 3 technologies are truly robust, resilient, with comparable throughput to Web 2 tech. Think how long it's taken Ethereum to get to this point, and then the blockages and the adaptability with kind of the modularity with layer 2s, and who knows what layer 3s will be.
Exactly.
But of course, as you mentioned, as a user myself, and I've been in space, 8, 9 years, whatever. And you mentioned the UX needs to continually upgrade, or there will always be barriers for, let's say, my mom. She's not going to hop into MetaMask, figure out how to connect to a chain, and then degen across multiple dApps, switch chains, create new RPCs and setups in MetaMask or whatever wallet.
No.
So much to do. And in the same vein, self-custody, which is always the best route, as we've seen over the past year or more with all these crazy black swans, well centralized, but crazy black swans. But it needs to be smoother. It needs to become easier. And that work is just starting with things like account abstraction and wallet innovations that we're seeing across the space.
Absolutely.
But then beyond that, to get people really in the space, we just need builders to create game-changing dApps. DeFi has done a great job of finding product market fit, even with the UX barriers we've through. All good? So yeah, DeFi has done a great job, product market fit. But when gaming, social, and other big use cases make killer dApps, meaning dApps that the world loves, that's when we'll see another huge influx of new users to the space that aren't interested in DeFi or other existing Web3 native
speculative side, right? Some of that may start to dissipate away slightly, that speculative money making side. I think it'll always be there.
I think it'll always be there, man. That's just human. But
as we get into more sort of practical use cases, but even what we've seen is the sort of beginnings of that with gaming, but it's still speculative, right? It's still reliant on token economies, and they're not straight NFT plays with ownership, but we're getting there, right? Like we're going towards it.
I don't know. I'm kind of a gamer. I like good games. I don't have as much time as I used to, but there's no games that I'd play for fun right now. So I want, a Zelda Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring style Web3 game where I can get I just want a really cool game in general, RPG or exploratory thing that, imagine if there were an MLR or AI expanding world that continually changed, that had in-game purchases and trading, created this little market, but was actually fun to play. That's what I want, right? That's the nerd in me. But we'll see what's great is the primitives are being built right now, meaning it's, I think gaming is the equivalent of DeFi's evolution when it was in 2017, 18. So it's getting funded. A lot of cool things are happening, getting a lot of attention, and some aping in, but then it goes down, and then it has 3 or 4 years to build until it finds game summer. So that's where I think we are. And that's okay. I like the building, and I have time. But that's how I see things going. There's fads. It's hot. and it raises money, and then the builders survive and cool shit comes out, which is what I like to see.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it though, right? Like you say, you get the initial hype, then you get the drop away of all the kind of freeloaders, and then you get the really defined. And you touched on it earlier as well when you said that in order to go mainstream to begin with, the tech has to be in place and has to be ready.
That's right.
When people look from the outside in to the blockchain industry, they think we've got it all nailed. Like we've done it. Like why are we not achieving mass adoption? I think it's only us inside that know we are quite a way away, and we're still only like 11 to 12 years deep on this journey. And I think people are just getting impatient, right? Like maybe even so people inside the industry too are a little bit impatient, but I agree with you. I think we've got some way to go, especially until we see like our nans and other people using it. I think when that happens, they won't even know that they're using it.
When it's gained world adoption. I mean, look at the internet. It was hypothesized, I think, 89. Took 10 years to find this mania, crashed in 2001, and now there are trillion-dollar internet companies that sadly run the world in a lot of ways. So that's one thing we're trying to disrupt.
That's one thing we're trying to change, right, Kyle?
One of many things, yeah.
One thing that's always occurred to me is that, and because you're from a military background, military actually drives a lot of R&D and tech innovation in the world.
Sure. DARPA and the like, yeah.
Yeah, like we do see that. I see that with AI. I see that, but I don't see that with blockchain and crypto stuff so much. Maybe I'm just not reading the right documents, but do you see anything like that happening there?
I'd say we don't know what the military is doing. We don't know what DARPA is doing. We don't know what the military is doing until 25 years later, most of the time, and it's unsealed.
True.
But from a philosophical standpoint, the ideology of Web3, the Web3 space is open, transparent, permeable landlines across countries.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a threat to the idea in the military's mind of national security.
Yeah.
And the idea of Bitcoin. There's a major in the Air Force, maybe in Space Force, Major Jason Lowry, who wrote a book called Soft War. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard the premise of how Bitcoin is a political tool that can be used to disrupt a lot of things. And again, I'll read it later. I don't have time to read books as much as I used to, but I think the philosophy behind Web3 is maybe different from the incentive. And I think incentives drive all. The incentive is for militaries to make their country the strongest and feel the strongest, and for themselves to feel the strongest and powerful. And I don't know if that's the value of Web3. It's more
sharing.
Everyone should be able to do anything, and if you do something wrong, there can be detective sleuths that can find it, but you can't block it. So people have the responsibility to choose the right thing. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to go down there, but I've been out of that world
a long time now, right?
Over a decade now. So it's it's probably changed a lot since I was in. But I don't know. We'll see how it works out. Hopefully it's changed the incentives across militaries and it changed the dynamics, because you change the incentives, you change the outcome.
Exactly right. It was just something that occurred to me when we were talking there, that it usually does have quite a large impact, but in this space, perhaps we're not. But what you've said, actually, they don't align, right? So it does make a lot of sense. Yeah. All right, cool. Carl, let's just quickly dive in, because I want to let people building in the Fuse ecosystem, how can builders on Fuse utilize the graph to enrich their ideas and dApps? Just from a very high level, what can they do? I mean, we touched on it basically, but give it the high level sale, man. Like, well, how can people really, why should they be using the graph?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, if anyone's building this space, they always choose those few things. So blockchain, recording layer, which is Fuse in this case, and they choose their Oracle, which is often Chainlink. And then if they want to get their blockchain into their application, they need to choose an indexing solution. And again, you can index it yourself, but what you can do is simply go use the hosted service right now for free, or hobbyists and hackers can go to the Subgraph Studio, a rate limited environment, and there'll probably always be that sandbox environment for people to tool for no cost, and just go build it for yourself. what I'd even recommend is try to do it yourself in whatever block explorer there is, and parse it out, build your scripts, build and maintain your own APIs, and then you'll see how hard it is. And then when you think of other aspects of the data layer, go try something and then compare it to the graph. And
Mhm.
that's why almost everyone in the space uses the graph. It's because it's the most versatile API, and it enables people to power their entire front ends.
Yeah,
Where some smaller organization might be good for one or two niche things,
yeah,
for an entire front end, it's just easier to have the graph through subgraphs as your infrastructure.
yeah. Love it.
So yeah, if you're building anything, you should probably reach out and let's get in touch, and happy to help.
How kind of friendly is the tech with, let's say, non-Web3 developers, like a Web2 developer, perhaps, who's, I know you just said then it's have a go, experiment, but how friendly is it? Like, do you guys provide tutorials, guides, lots of information, or is it kind of turn them out into the sandbox and off you go? Like, how do you guys do
Let's say it's a lot better than it was a year ago, and it's a lot better than it was 2 years ago. But the graph is a developer tool. So it is a technical tool that builders use as an essential component of their tech stack.
Yeah,
And it requires knowledge of GraphQL and knowledge of what data you'd want to know from the blockchain. Not too hard to use if you spend a little time, but my mom isn't going to go use some GraphQL queries to get some blockchain data, no matter how badly she wants it. And that begs the question of, we discussed a little earlier, how does the graph become normie friendly? And
yeah,
that's the one thing that I mentioned Semiotic Labs and Edgenode and others are working on through the large language models, utilizing AI in figuring out how to have a ChatGPT style
tell it what you want.
information. Yeah, but ChatGPT is based on non-deterministic, which means 10 out of 10 times it's not the correct and same information across the internet, meaning you won't get the same outcome every time, and it could be led astray
Yeah,
if you think it's true, if you feel it's true.
yeah,
So obviously deterministic data being the opposite and most trustworthy. But imagine if you have a simple Google search bar style question to ask anything you'd want to know.
yeah, exactly.
And that's really cool. When it comes to the NFT space, imagine if it's in gaming ecosystems, and if it's in social ecosystems, and it becomes a Google level experience of, on this social platform, how many people have joined this, or how many people are holding this NFT, or how many people are in profit in this NFT, or how many people have played this game and left, how many
Yeah,
people have played this game and stayed. Like, those are things that would be really fun just from a fundamental standpoint for me. And I've always been like a blockchain sleuth, and I would go find it on my own for my own knowledge, but it's tedious.
it
And
is. It is. It
and I
is.
want to be able to do it. And I'm not a coder. I'm not super technical, even though I can talk technically. Um, but I'd love to be able to use that. I would use that all the time. I
Mm.
mean, I Google stuff all the time, and I'd love to do it with verifiable on-chain data.
It'd be amazing. Like I do, I've done a lot of content writing in my time and article
Cool.
writing, journalistic writing, and for that alone, what you're talking about would be utterly amazing. Because as
Yeah.
you're saying, internet sleuthing is all fine, but there's the capacity for mistakes. It's
Yeah.
also not that easy. It's a pretty hard game. So something like that would be absolutely incredible, really. So is that where you see the company getting to in terms of a platform, in that it's that simple to use? Not now, but in the future, that developers could come and say, I want to build an application that can do X, Y, Z, and it just kind of occurs.
I think the graph will always be a developer tool. I'd like to see this use case,
Mm.
but the graph, I think, will be much more than just this in the
Yeah,
future.
that might be a sub arm of it, just built for a specific use case or something like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say this is what it would be.
Mm.
I'd like to see it though. So yeah, I'm not good at predicting anything because there's so many diverging paths until then, but it'd be fun to see, and I'd
It'd
use
be
it
cool.
every day.
Yeah, it'd be cool, right? I've been watching a lot of the Chat GBT kind of videos, and I watched the tech tutorial yesterday on the new version.
Crazy,
It's like,
crazy.
how
I
long is
love it.
my job gonna last, right? Like that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Load me up before I get overtaken by the AI.
But
Yeah,
it makes me think about, I mean, sorry to diversify, but I
no
remember
worries.
Elon talking about that kind of human upload speed is too slow. And that's kind of what we're addressing at the moment, isn't it? And he's right. Like, we have capacity to be much greater, but we're too slow. We're restricted by these and by these guys, like, and this. So I can see good things and bad things, but at the moment I'm just kind of treading carefully around it, to be honest. But yeah.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of innovation,
Mm.
and I think even if it's scary sometimes, the best leading indicator of survivability and thrivability of anything, whether it's society or a company or even a person emotionally, is just constant innovation, anti-fragility, constantly growing. Because when you stop doing any of that, when you stop innovating, you're just going to atrophy. And
Yeah.
so we're seeing an insane level of innovation in weeks to years. We went from Chat GPT-3 to Chat GPT-4 in weeks, and that's it took the railroads hundreds of years, to tech companies, Web2 tech companies, decades, and it took taking crypto a decade or less, and then it's really now we're in an age where it might take weeks to years to really truly see groundbreaking innovation going from one iteration to the next. And
It's,
I love that. And we'll either adapt, hop on the steamroller, or become part of the road. So that's
yeah.
my thought, which is also scary because I've read Elon's biography, and I know his thoughts on AI, and
Mm.
it is scary to me, but it's also kind of an inevitability because the incentive is there for someone to create it. And then once it's this event horizon, there's almost nothing we can do about it, but it's going to be hard to stop once you open Pandora's box.
You can't really go back, can you, after that? It's like any revolution of such where you discover a new fuel, for example. We didn't go back and think, oh, okay, well, just that's dirty, we won't use that. It's kind of a moment when we won't be able, the train will be going too fast to stop it, basically, I think is what's going to happen. So, but an interesting future ahead. Anyway, Carl, I could literally talk to you about this stuff all day, but we don't.
Sorry, I go off.
We don't have we don't have time for that at the moment. But the last question I want to kind of get into, trends in the industry right now. You said you spoke to a lot of builders at ETH Denver. What kind of trends are you seeing out there, Carl? Who's building? What are they building? What's the focus on? And like, what do you see kind of leading the space over the next kind of 8 to 9 months of the rest of the year? Like, what's happening out there? Who's applying?
I'd say I think it's still all about, like, core building is still all about infrastructure. That means layer 1, layer 2, layer X season. It's core Web3 infrastructure, such as the graph for data indexing, Filecoin and Arweave, and others for storage, off-chain like Ceramic and others. People figuring out how to rebuild infrastructure, because that's what's going to gain adoption, and that's the cross-chain adoption that truly blows up, like what the graph did. And then you think of the other parts of infrastructure, obviously, is blockchains. So layer 1, layer 2, layer X innovations are still happening, right? Whether it's Base or whether it's Celestia or all the Stark and Snark stuff going on. ZKs are probably still years out, but that's still a lot of innovation to be had. So that's what I see as the most important. But with regards to product market fit, DeFi, I think, still reigns. And it'll continue to eat the world's assets in different ways, and it'll continue to cross-pollinate. But then that doesn't mean that's what's hot, but that's what people are building, because that's what's found best product market fit: infrastructure that gains adoption and DeFi. When you think of what's hot, it's but still early, like I said, gaming, social, it's still ZKs because it could be years out. And then, I mean, there was just so many ZK projects building, and a few of them were far along. Some were just starting out, but there were a lot of gaming folks in Denver and a lot across the world. So I think that's exciting, but it's still far out. I'd say, there's a dichotomy there of what's essential and what's going to find product market fit, and then what's really exciting, what's getting a lot of people building. And that's the real world aspects of gaming, social, and others.
Yeah, I see.
There's a lot of other stuff too. There's so much stuff.
Super interesting though, because of what you're saying, that something finds product market fit previously, DeFi, that's where people are allocating resources because they know there's a market there, which is interesting. And at the same time, you've got a lot of experimentation and kind of innovation occurring as well. But we're still kind of circling around DeFi, right? And ultimately, everything is DeFi, really. Gaming, NFTs, isn't it? I guess to a certain
dynamics, yeah.
Yeah, it's in terms of that. It's that kind of speculative nature, I think, that people just love that, right? Like, and you said, we've got a big degen kind of thing. I think we all are at heart. It's why we came to this space, some of us, I think. So we don't want that to disappear entirely. Right, Kyle, let's wrap things up. I want to thank you for today. You've been an amazing guest. You've outlined the graph and what it is that you do and the company behind Edge and Node amazingly well. And I think if anybody's listened to us talk and doesn't understand that the graph is basically choice number one, then they weren't listening correctly, right? So the last thing I wanted to get you to do, Carl, is people who are listening, who want to reach out, who want to understand more, or perhaps want to talk to you personally, how can they do that? How can they connect with you guys? What's the best way? And yeah, how do you handle that stuff?
Sure. I'd say the first place is always to keep track of updates and announcements by following the Graph Twitter, and that's at Graph Protocol. Next, people should definitely check out thegraph.com, whether someone wants to look through the docs, see in real time who's using the graph on hosted and decentralized network, or even dig into the subgraphs themselves and query some on-chain data. I'd also hop into the Graph Discord for any technical questions, the Graph official community Telegram for high-level questions. But of course, someone can always reach out to me directly on Twitter, LinkedIn, or any other chat medium. My handle is pretty much always at lowercase Kyle, capital A, lowercase Rojas. And I'm always happy to help when and where able, though sometimes it takes me a little while to catch up on chat. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you need anything in the Graph ecosystem.
Nice. Perfect. Thank you, Carl. I'll put all that information into the video description as well. So if anyone's listening, it'll be in there as well. So don't worry about that. You can definitely contact them. All right. Thank you so much, Carl. Thanks for your time today. I know you're a busy man, and I wish you the best of luck for the rest of your day. The rest of your meetings are as lovely as this one, and you have as much fun in those. But yeah, thank you again for coming along and talking to the community. I'm sure we'll talk again. Anything else you want to say just to finish us off for today?
No, man. Thanks for having me on. I look forward to seeing you in person and having a beer soon.
Yeah, man. That sounds good. All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And